mentioned, we're back in 2008. I was just reminding myself as well that back in 2011, in January 2011, I was targeted to come to Egypt on behalf of, at the time, GS1, right? Yes. And the topic that I was speaking about is how to overcome and basically build a sustainable supply chain from a geopolitical event. Of course, you know what January 2011 was. So I had to obviously abandon my visit. It was in the middle of the short revolution period. And they asked if I was still willing to come back to Egypt to speak on this subject. I said, of course. At the time, we still had tanks in the streets and curfew. I was targeted to speak about resiliency of supply chain, like I'll be talking about today, now almost, some many years later. At that point in time, however, we were supposed to be speaking to 50 people and 300 people showed up. Obviously very topical. And here we are again, talking about the nature of chaotic supply chains. Thankfully, it's not the same situation, at least here. It's not the same situation that we had in 2011. But is anybody not suffering from a supply chain perspective with the number and amount of supply chain disruptions that we have across the world today? Anybody not suffering? Raise your hand. Okay. So we're all here today to talk a little bit about that. So let's talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about the future of supply chain. First, let me just explain. Most of you know who ASCM is. Symbios is our sole sponsor, our sole partner within the country for ASCM, the Association of Supply Chain Managers. We're a long-time standing organization, formerly known as APICS. I'll explain a little bit why we changed our name, because we have a broadening of our purpose. But our purpose is at the heart of, I think, what everybody in this room believes, which is we can make the world a better place through supply chain. And that's certainly why we're in the business. So we have presence, of course, across many countries, over 100 countries. We have approximately, at any one point in time, about 45,000 members. So we are the largest supply chain association in the world, focused on a number of aspects, which I'll explain in a moment. Particularly, we are well known for the talent development piece. Right? This is, of course, of concern to all of us, because our supply chains are moving at such a pace that it's difficult for us to grow the talent at the same pace as our need, right? When we start looking at the need for additional digital capabilities, for example, it's difficult for us to have enough talent to even make use of the technology which we have available to us. So we, of course, focus on the talent development side of our business. In addition to that, and the reason that we moved from just being APICS to being the Association of Supply Chain Management is also to focus on corporate transformation, taking the talent that we build inside of organizations and moving those organizations to a new future state. Not being happy to just be good, but to be great. Right? So assisting and building the tools, the techniques, the approaches to be able to move companies from the current state to the future. This is our corporate transformation focus. And dear to my heart is the next one, which is around sustainability. How do we also not only move our supply chains to a future state to allow us to meet the economic stakeholder needs, but to do so with respect to the environment, so ecological, and also operate in an ethical way. This is what we know as the triple bottom line. We'll talk about this in a moment as well. And then the fourth piece is really the piece that we talk about relative to our foundation piece. We have been the recipients of several grants, including from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We received a grant for $5 million last year. We're also working with USAID, doing on-the-ground work to ensure that we are using the supply chain capabilities that we have as an association to improve communities. An example of that is the work that we did last year and is ongoing this year with what's called the PEPFAR Dreams program out of the US, where we're targeting educating women between the ages of 18 and 22 who live in AIDS-susceptible regions to give them employment so they can bring home money to the families, and that will, in and of itself, their employment will reduce the chance of them contracting AIDS 10 times less. This is very important. Success so far, we've been able to place women in jobs at a rate of 80% in regions that have 60% unemployment. This is what we do at the foundational level. Again, living up to our mission of making the world better through supply chain. So I just wanted to start with that, just to give you a sense of where we are from an organization standpoint. I know many of you are individual members, some of your corporations are also members. I'm glad that you're joining the journey that we live every day in making the world a better place. We do that, as you can see here. This is our strategy statement. At the bottom, you see really where our focus is. We spend time building compelling products and solutions, working to orchestrate our ecosystem. This includes our training partners like Symbios. It includes academic partners. It includes technology and advisory partners, etc. So managing different programs, orchestrating throughout this ecosystem. Also bringing some business intelligence into the equation. I'm going to share some of that intelligence with you as we embark on a study that we did with the Economist Intelligence Unit around supply chain resiliency. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those insights today because this is important for you, and I'm going to beg you, I won't get on my knees, I'm going to beg you to go to the link which we send out in the invite for this and complete the resiliency survey so that tomorrow, when we come together, I can give back to you a perspective of how resiliency is in this country because it's based upon your inputs. If you don't give me the inputs, I can't give you the outputs. So for those who are attending tomorrow, even those who would like to receive the output of that, I need you to complete the survey in order for this to happen. I'd love to be able to give you a comparative of how well organizations in this country are set up strategically and operationally to be resilient compared to the world at large. Give me the intelligence, and I'll give you back intelligence, right? So please, 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 beg you, complete the survey so that we can do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where we are in the state of the world today. We are certainly not without disruption. We have disruption on all kinds of fronts. In fact, we live now in such a chaotic world of supply chain that many of us believe this is the new normal. So if you're hoping, as a supply chain professional, that your world is going to get easier, better, simpler, and you can have more time, and you can relax, you should change your job. Because we're now faced with a world where, quite simply, the amount of variability in the supply chain, the need for us to be able to respond, the resiliency that we're going to be faced with is now the new normal. Whether that be geopolitical, as we can see, for example, gave an interview last week with the New York Times talking about what is the impact from the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, for example. Right? And we're going to talk a little bit about these kind of events. It could be that, where you may, for example, have a supplier who has a footprint in the region, and you don't even know it. Right? We'll talk about this in a moment when we talk about supply chain visibility. Right? But we have all kinds of things. We have climate change impacts. We have trade and tariff wars. We have other geopolitical events happening with regards to what's going on between China and Hong Kong and Taiwan, for example, at the moment. We have currency exchange issues. We have oil price increases. We have other cost of labor considerations, etc. All of these impacting factors are going to continue to haunt us a little bit. When we did the EIU study with the Economist Intelligence Unit, we asked supply chain leaders across the globe what were, for example, today's concerns relative to supply chain risks and threats? And this is what they came back with, right? No surprise, we did it a few months after the start of the pandemic. The pandemic topped the list. It probably wouldn't even have been on the list if we had done the study 2 years prior. But look what else is there. Cyber attacks, market changes, bankruptcy of key suppliers, natural disasters, extreme weather conditions, geopolitical instability. Every one of these is happening now. This is not theoretical. Our supply chains are suffering with every one of these impacting factors. I mean, how many cyber threats have we seen? How many climate change factor impacts have we seen? How many of your suppliers are at risk of not being able to fund your growth with them? In other words, they may not have the solvency to be able to grow with your growth. We see examples of this. I think Ron is going to talk a little bit about this later as well with regards to things, for example, integrated circuits or IC components, right? You understand how this has impacted the automotive industry, right? Why? Because we were naive. We didn't see, for example, that the same component that is used to run the electronics of an automobile is the same integrated circuit technology which is used in home networking equipment. So when automobile manufacturers during the initial months of the pandemic saw that automobile demand went down, they decreased their orders with their suppliers. Well, at the same time, all of us started working at home and recognized that we didn't have the technology to do so, so we bought technology. We bought modems and other technologies for home networking. So the increase for the same components went up. So when the automobile manufacturers came back and they said, oh, I need now these components because automobile demand comes back, the supplier said, sorry, we don't have them. This is a multi-billion dollar impact in countries which produce, primary countries which produce automotive, which of course, one of them is the US. Right? It's a GDP impacting factor because we were so naive that we didn't understand the need for visibility within our supply chain. One of the key insights we're looking at in a moment. So let's take a look at a few of those. Again, I encourage you, please go to the link. We'll give it to you several times today. Complete the survey so tomorrow we can compare your results to the results at large. So let's talk about some of these vulnerabilities. I mentioned some of them already. When we set up the study with the Economist Intelligence Unit, we broke down the supply chain resiliency impacting factors into two major categories. The first is operational supply chain resiliency. The second is strategic. Which one of those do you think within your own organization you're better at? The strategic resiliency, the operational resiliency? How many think they're better at the strategic side? By show of hands. Operational? Everybody else? The rest of you are denying the fact that you need operational resiliency. So what happens is, of course, we're better organizationally at the firefighting than the fire prevention. Do you agree? And we celebrate it. We go, oh my gosh, we got ourselves out of this big problem. Let's applaud. Instead, what we should be asking ourselves is, why did we have the problem to begin with? Right? This is the difference between the strategic, the fire prevention, than the operational, which is the firefighting. So we'll dig a little bit more into that. So our operational side is about our ability to bounce back, to recover to whatever the new normal state of affairs is. Right? When we take a look at the strategic side, it's about the bounce forward. How do we adapt to whatever becomes the new normal? So within the Economist Intelligence Unit study, we looked at both of these. And these were the primary factors that came out of it. I spoke about the first one already. And we have been talking about this for decades. We do not have the visibility in the supply chain that we need in order to better manage our business. We lack total visibility. particularly at the multi-hierarchical level. What is happening? What are vulnerabilities that we should be concerned about with our supplier's supplier? We know our supplier very well. But in order to protect ourselves, in order to be resilient, in order to avoid potential risk or disruption in our supply chain, only understanding the first tier, the first hierarchy, is simply not enough. My example of the Ukraine invasion, for example. If I don't know that, if at first glance I say I'm not impacted because I don't have a supplier or a customer within this region, this is quite naive, because my supplier's supplier may have a footprint within the region. I have unanticipated consequences that will hit me and hit me hard if I don't have visibility in the supply chain. And that's the first thing that was uncovered. And it's disappointing because it's no longer the technology which is prohibiting us from having visibility. What do you think it is? It's trust. It's not the technology. It's the culture. It's the trust we have to be able to share information across the ecosystem of the supply base. This is what's impacting us. 10 years ago, it was the technology. People said, I can't gain visibility because I don't have the technology to bring that visibility forward, so that I had a control tower view. It's not technology any longer. It's our ability and willingness and cultural aspect of trust. The second insight that we saw, of course, is also going back to our supply base. We still have not learned what it means to have a strategic supplier relationship. SRM, we heard this topic, SRM, supplier relationship management. We talk to our suppliers as partners until it comes time for negotiation. And then they are a supplier. Right? We still haven't learned how to make the big bets with each other. We still haven't learned about what it means to be win-win with our suppliers. We still haven't learned what it means to build resiliency together. If I go back to the automotive example, why didn't the integrated circuit suppliers, why didn't Intel call General Motors and say, you better put some more orders in because the consumption of the same component that you need to ship an automobile is being over-consumed in consumer electronics? Why didn't that conversation happen? Why didn't the supplier protect its key customer? That's ridiculous. It simply means we did not have a strategic supplier relationship. If they did, we wouldn't have been in that situation. Agreed? Third point, once we do understand in our planning that we have scenarios of risk where risk could happen, how do we respond to that with a very strategic, what we call playbook strategy? How many of you do sales and operation planning overall? How many people do sales and operation planning? Okay, we're going to talk about this in a moment. Okay, almost everybody. Do you do scenario modeling? Yes, some of you, most of you. Okay. When you model a scenario and you think something could potentially happen to you, do you build a playbook strategy based upon the outcome of the scenario? Okay, a couple of great people. This is exactly what we're talking about, right? It's not enough just to have the scenario. We have to understand that if this scenario becomes reality, what is it that we need to do? This is point number 3. Point number 4 we'll talk about again in a moment. This is so disappointing. The fact that we still do not operationalize sustainability into our supply chain. We still do not. We like to talk about it. We like to have an aspiration of being sustainable. We make public statements about this. We're going to decrease our carbon footprint. We're going to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. We're going to reduce the amount of energy and other aspects of when we create equipment. We're going to reduce the amount of waste. We're going to build circularity into our supply chain. It's more aspiration than reality still. We need to increase that. We'll talk about this one as well. So these are the 4 key things that we found at large across global companies from the survey. I want to see how this compares to companies here in Egypt. Fill out the survey. We'll be able to do that tomorrow. Okay? And when we do that, we'll talk about some of the best practices. I'm not going to go through all of these, of course, now, but we want to talk about not just what we find, but what are the insights? What can we do better to recover from these issues? What are the best practices that are related to gaining supply chain visibility? What are the best practices for increasing maturity for building supplier relationships? What are the best practices associated with how we build more thoughtful, better playbooks to respond to scenarios becoming reality? And of course, how do we get better in terms of building sustainability, operationalizing sustainability into the decision process of our supply chain? This is what tomorrow's conversation will be about. For those of you who have a concern about sustainability or a concern about building ESG standards, governance into your supply chains, we have a solution for that. We have spent the last few years building the world's first corporate level supply chain sustainability standards focused specifically on supply chain, which takes into account the triple bottom line. Again, the triple bottom line is economic, stakeholder impact. We can't ignore this. We still have to deliver profits back to the organization. We are a nonprofit. I remind our team this is a tax state, it's not a goal. I'm sure most of you do not have nonprofit as a goal either, so we need to have economic returns to our stakeholders. We also need, of course, to be managing the supply chain in an ethical fashion, and we need to manage the supply chain with proper respect for our planet, and that, of course, is the ecological side. So those 3 things came together, and then we built the world's first set of supply chain sustainability standards. This is known as the Enterprise Certification for Sustainability Standards. We have now released that. It is now available to everyone in the world free of charge. This set of standards focuses on all the layers that you might see here. If you're familiar with the SCORE model, you'll see no surprise. At the heart of this, we see plan, source, make, deliver, return. These are the major processes that we describe within the supply chain. You see the layer around that is focused around the 3 pieces of the triple bottom line: economic, ecological, and ethical. And then you see, of course, our enablement layer. Do we have the proper strategy for sustainability? Do we have the workforce who is trained and understands what this means in terms of their daily job? We have, of course, technology enablement and knowledge management to support that. And then finally, the governance piece. The outer layer of our standards is focused on stakeholders. We're a supply chain after all, so no surprise. You see customer, and you see supplier, you see government, right? And then you see the community as well. So this entire set of standards is available to you not only to digest, but they're also through ASCM, and you can access this through Symbios as a partner. You can also assess yourselves and your maturity levels on these sustainability standards free of charge, right? What we want to do in making the world better through supply chain is give you the ability to test yourself, test your own strengths. How good is my organization in respecting this triple bottom line? Allow yourself the opportunity to do that maturity assessment so you understand your own sustainable vulnerabilities. Once you understand the gaps, then you could work to obviously close the gaps there. So again, free to everyone to be able to use that. It's a great way to test your strength around sustainability. All right, let's close out the discussion a little bit with what is hot off the press. Every year, the association does the top 10 trends of what's going to impact supply chain for the coming years. This is done through a portion of volunteers that we manage. It's called our Risk Committee, Research, Innovation, and Sensing. The Sensing Subcommittee spends the entire year identifying the key trends that are going to impact supply chain the most. So I'd like to share with you, for the first time publicly, since the new release of this year, is really what the top 10 trends look like. So again, this is a year-long process. This is a committee that spends the entire year looking at research and literature and other citations to try to come up with what they think the top 10 trends are. Overall, the theme of this is around enterprise-level optimization. So optimizing across the enterprise. These are some sub-themes that you might see here. For example, no surprise, optimizing technologies, right? Making better utilization of our technology enablement layer. In particular, taking fuller advantage of the technology available to us from ERPs and other operating systems. Also, workforce optimization. So taking a look at the needs of our workforce. Again, no surprise, one of those bigger needs is focused on how do we grow the workforce and the talent to take advantage of digital transformation. We'll be talking more about digital transformation. How many of you are in a digital transformation initiative of some kind right now? I'd be surprised, show of hands. Okay, raise them high. Okay, almost everybody in the room, some kind of digital transformation, right? That means a lot of different things to different people, right? Organizations, oh, I'm doing digital transformation. When you look at what that means, I'm going to do the wrong things quicker. Digital transformation is about rethinking what it is that we do and how we do it, taking full advantage of techniques and technologies, really utilizing artificial intelligence, taking a look at how we really can capitalize on Internet of Things and connect our manufacturing operations together with each other. They can self-diagnose their own needs. How do we take full advantage of blockchain to safeguard our supply chain, etc.? That's digital transformation. It's not just automation. Warehouse and distribution footprints are also being optimized, right? This is a very, very, very hot topic at the moment. Why? Because of our transportation delays. Right? If you're operating only within a singular country, not so concerning, but if you're operating in a multinational environment, right, this is of grave concern. Companies, particularly, I reside in the US, I'm there sometimes. I reside in the US. If you know anything about the transportation concerns between the factory of the world, which is in China, and the largest consumer base in the world, one of them certainly is in the US. The transportation between the two is twice as long. That's already concerning. With considerable variability in on-time delivery. And I don't know if you've been watching the prices, but a container shipment from China to the Long Beach or LA port, which imports 40% of the US consumption, the price is 10 times greater than it was 24 months ago. 10 times. Takes twice as long, and it's 10 times more expensive. Do you think that's going to cause a few companies to reconsider their global footprint? I guess yes. This is, of course, concern. We have companies that are, of course, rethinking inventory. This is a hot topic, one I spend a lot of time getting interviewed on. Is just-in-time dead? Sorry, lean people. Sorry, Symbios. No. Is just-in-time dead, right? Have we moved from JIT to JIC? Just in case, right? There's a lot of inventory responsiveness that's happening. People are trying to overcome the need for resiliency. What is the number one way in which we become more resilient? We fund it with inventory. Right? This, of course, is expensive and dangerous, right? So, but inventory, of course, is good. Customer centricity is still on the list. And of course, how do we build an organization that is able to respond to these things as well? Let's take a look at what the top 10 list says. Of course, this is the third year in a row where analytics and automation has topped the list. Still so much to learn from being able to use analytics capabilities. If you are a data scientist, anybody a data scientist in the room? Snuggle up with these people, right? Because clearly you're busy. I don't know why you're here. You've got more than enough to do, right? The key, of course, with analytics, and this is going to be a great topic for us as well through the coming days, I'm sure, is how do we use analytics to enable decision making, right? Forget, we talk about a lot about, I love people who say, yes, we need to capture more insights from big data. I love that term. We haven't even learned how to capture insights from small data, right? Let alone big data. So we got a lot to do there. Of course, talent is topping the list as well. Still have a major concern on talent. We have this visibility. This is not a surprise, as we saw also from the EIU study. Visibility is critical, particularly multi-hierarchy visibility. E-commerce, you see there, risk and resiliency, agility. Digital, still on the list, although dropped down a little bit. Cybersecurity, customer centricity, and artificial intelligence. So these are the top 10 trends that are there. Of course, we can dig into some of these a little bit more. But again, advanced analytics automation, been on the list at the top for 3 years in a row. You see talent and e-commerce on the rise, somewhat driven by the pandemic. Those two things are not a surprise, also relative to digital. In most cases, companies have taken a 5-year digital agenda and had to compress it into 12 months. As a result of the pandemic. We had to learn how to do things differently. And unfortunately, taking advantage of that technology put pressure on the talent side as well, again, because a lot of times we had the technology, but we didn't have the talent to be able to operate. If we take a look at this overall, this is just taking a look at the impact versus likelihood of these particular trends. And you see up in the upper right-hand corner, these are the trends that appear to be the highest likelihood of occurring and also the largest of the impacts. And there, of course, we see advanced analytics, talent again reappearing, supply chain agility, visibility, and risk and resilience. Finally, taking a final look at the top 10 trends and how they impact the various components of the supply chain. So here you see actually the top 14. These are the top 10 plus the 4 that fell off the list but were on the list last year. It's a total of 14. And you can see how these top 10 trends impact the various supply chain processes. So the darker the color, the bigger the impact. So you can see here, for example, advanced analytics and automation has the biggest impact, not solely, but the biggest impact on plan, supply chain talent, also on plan, visibility between plan and deliver, etc. And you can see the full list here. So what it tells us is that the top 10 trends actually have a multi-process impact for the most part, right? So these trends are going to impact multiple portions of the supply chain overall. Why are the trends important? If you don't have a response to take advantage of the trends, then you're probably going to miss something out, right? If you don't have a strategy for how to take fuller advantage of analytics, if you don't have a strategy for how to gain additional multi-hierarchy visibility, if you haven't really thought through or done your maturity assessments on resiliency, if you haven't have set a policy and protection for cybersecurity, etc. There's a whole briefing on this, which we'll send out to everyone, which details out what each of these trends mean in greater detail. Again, we do this annually, and then we publish it out. You're the first audience to be able to see the output of this. Okay. So I just wanted to share some of those insights. If we think about it, if I go back to our starting point of what our 3 focus areas are, around talent. So how do we continue to educate, certify, and credential talent to ensure that they meet the future needs of your organizations? This, of course, is critically important to us. How do we assist organizations in doing corporate transformation, building out the tool sets, the templates, the approach, the technologies to be able to move you from a current state to whatever is your desired future state? This, of course, is part of our focus as well. And then lastly, how do we ensure that our organizations are being responsible overall, including, of course, responsible to the planet, and doing so in an ethical way. We're going to spend 2 days together, at least today for most of you, and some of you also for tomorrow. I encourage you to continue to ask questions of us and see how we can support you. It's going to be challenging times for sure going forward. There's not any sort of relief in sight. This is good for us that work in the supply chain discipline. It makes our job more fun, more challenging, more exciting, and we're here to go through the journey together. Thank you very much.